watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
I'm Mark Golub, and there's been something of a scandal reported in the Jewish world affecting the academic community at Yale University and Yale's abrupt closing of its Institute for the Interdisciplinary Study of Anti-Semitism, known by the acronym YIISA, which for roughly the past 5 years has been presenting a steady stream of outstanding academicians and professors, authors, leading thinkers, all of whom have treated both the historical roots of anti-Semitism and, more importantly, the current expressions of anti-Semitism throughout the world today. So the likes of Professor Benny Morris, one of Israel's leading new historians, spoke at YIISA on the ways in which the Israeli-Arab struggle has always been, to some extent, influenced by Islamic jihad. Or Yaakov Kershen, Israel's iconic cartoon satirist, showed how the Arab world conveys anti-Semitic messages through its cartoons. YIISA has featured people like Professor David Katz, an award-winning researcher and author, and the chief analyst at the Litvak Studies Institute in Vilnius, and an honorary research associate in the Department of Hebrew and Jewish Studies at University College in London. Or Alan Dershowitz, defending his film The Case for Israel, which had just been shown to a live audience of Yale faculty and students at a YIISA event. Or Professor Dorian Bell, of the Literature Department of the University of California, who appeared at YIISA in conjunction with the Yale French Department, speaking about the history of Hannah Arendt, anti-Semitism, and the legacies of empire. Or Professor Moshe Postone, professor of history at the University of Chicago, who lectured on the anti-Semitism of the 19th and 20th century European intellectual. And Professor Stephen Norwood, of the History Department of the University of Oklahoma, speaking on legitimating Nazism in the Third Reich among American universities. And the list goes on and on and on. And if you're a frequent viewer of Shalom TV, you know that we were honored to cover many of YIISA's lectures, which I virtually always found to be extremely worthwhile and valuable and fascinating and enlightening. And then suddenly, and without any formal warning, Yale decided to sever its connection with YIISA and with its founding director, Dr. Charles Small, who is himself a noted academician in his own right, and Charles may well be the most respected individual in the field of the study of anti-Semitism today. Charles has a PhD in philosophy from Oxford. He is taught at University College in London and McGill University in Montreal, where he did his undergraduate work. And he's been a visiting expert on anti-Semitism at the Australian, British, and Canadian parliaments, at the German Bundestag, and at the United Nations in Geneva. Charles Small is also the president of the newly formed International Association for the Study of Anti-Semitism. And Charles joins us now to talk about the closing of YIISA and his feelings about it. And Charles, thank you for taking the time to join us.
It's an honor to be with you again.
Thank you. I need to do one more disclaimer for journalistic integrity. I am a friend of Charles Small. I consider him to be one of the real good guys on the world Jewish scene. We have spent social time together. You've seen him interviewed by me a number of times on Shalom TV. I am not a dispassionate journalist in this regard. I believe that Charles has done extraordinary work, and so you should know that about my own position as we discuss together now YIISA's closing at Yale. And before Charles came on Shalom TV to discuss YIISA's closing, I had a long talk with a spokesperson for Yale to get their perspective as well. And as I talk to Charles, I'll be able to at least explain to you, the viewer, and Charles knows this well, what has Yale's position been. But Charles, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
You and I last talked at APAC in May, and we talked about various aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we touched on anti-Semitism. And neither you nor I expected you to go back to Yale and have them pull the rug out from under YIISA. And many in the American Jewish community have thought you have done extraordinary work there. It's not that you have not had your critics. You've had your critics. And I want to pose to you what the general word is about YIISA and why Yale closed it from its perspective. And then I want you to really sort of lay out for me what your perspective is. And I want you to address the conflict that we've seen now raging in both the Jewish press. There's an editorial in the Washington, an op-ed piece written in the Washington Post, and many people have been very upset about YIISA's closing. Yale's perspective is the following, that it has a level of academic integrity that it wants to sustain, that for all the good work YIISA did, it did not come up to its standards. There was a panel that is empowered to review after 5 years programs such as YIISA. 4 of the members on the panel, and we're putting the names up on the screen right now, but 4 of the members of this panel reviewed YIISA. They are all tenured professors, so in theory, they are not threatened by any kind of pressure from the outside. They believe that in terms of Yale standards and the interests of Yale students, YIISA simply did not meet its standards, and as a result, they have decided to terminate YIISA's presence. That's Yale's perspective. How did you find out that Yale was closing YIISA, and what's your response?
Right. So first of all, I obviously disagree with the Yale decision. Every 5 years, research centers, all research centers at Yale are reviewed. So that's a normal process at the university. And usually the review committee will make all sorts of suggestions on how to improve the center. It's rare that they close the center, but it happens. What is extraordinary about this situation is that the review committee's report was deemed confidential. So all of the hearsay in the media, all of the so-called standards that YIISA didn't live up to, is basically information coming from their PR department. Nobody saw the report.
Have you seen the report?
No, I have not seen the report, and as Alan Dershowitz wrote in the Huffington Post, he's never seen anything like this in his entire academic career or heard anything like this. So this is a very unusual situation, and I think we were doing work that is perceived in some quarters of the academy as problematic or contentious, and it's unfortunate that Yale...
What was the problematic, contentious aspect of your work?
Well, I think that I would say in general, without sounding too facetious or uncaring, there's this belief, I think, in the academy that it's okay to study the plight of dead Jews. So if you look at Nazism and fascism and skinheads and the anti-Semitism of history, it's sort of a safe territory. It wasn't safe 40 or 50 years ago. The study of the Holocaust really became a part of the academy only in the 1960s and 70s. But to study and look at the situation for Jews who are living, particularly in the Middle East, in countries like Iran, or looking at how anti-Semitism in the Islamic world is affecting the Arab-Israeli conflict, how Iran, the Iranian regime, how Hamas and Hezbollah literally have imported the most pernicious forms of European genocidal anti-Semitism, namely the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and has infused this into their social movement and are using anti-Semitism as a strategic weapon not only against Jews but against the West and Western interests. And I think in a sense the academy, particularly the so-called liberals, sort of, I would say, have a view of the Middle East that was relevant 20 or 25 or 30 years ago. Sort of, they have a snapshot of the Middle East, sort of, basically in the 1980s and the 1990s. But since the end of the Cold War and with the rise of radical Islam in the Middle East, the terrain of the Middle East has changed. And as scholars, we at YIISA try to look at this objectively from different perspectives, from scholars in different disciplines, from different ideological perspectives, people from all over the world, and we did this at a high level. And I think in a way that this really is a taboo in certain circles. But I think people, without engaging the realities of the Middle East, are missing a point, because in a sense, there's this tendency to support the underdog. And the Palestinians are the underdog. They have legitimate rights that are not being realized, that I think are crucial to the future of the region, not just to Palestinians, but to Israelis and the region as a whole. But I think aside from taking those aspirations seriously and looking at international law and agreements vis-a-vis Palestinians and taking that as something very substantial and it impacts the region, beyond that, we have to see how Palestinian society and Iranian society and Lebanese society and Egyptian society views the Jew. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to do that in a rational, objective, scholarly, scientific way. And I think that ruffled feathers.
What makes you think that? And the reason I ask that is you've already told me you have not seen the report.
Right.
And Yale says to me, the people who evaluated YIISA had no axe to grind here. Mm-hmm. They were under no pressure, and that they were not influenced by political concerns, what is politically correct.
Right.
If you did not see the report, outside of having a gut feeling, is there any reason for you to say what you say?
There are two things. First of all, last August 2010, YIISA put on the largest academic conference on anti-Semitism ever.
And wasn't it very successful?
It was hugely successful. And I think for the first time, I was working on this project of creating YIISA for about 6 or 7 years.
Yes, we should say you created YIISA even before Yale became involved.
I started ISGAP, which was the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. And I actually approached Yale to bring it to within their university, and they agreed to it, and they renamed it YIISA. Mm-hmm. But we took our contacts and our work into the university. So we put on this major international conference, and it was called A Crisis of Modernity, so Global Anti-Semitism, A Crisis of Modernity. We had 108 speakers from 18 countries. There were young scholars and more senior scholars who've dedicated their lives to the study of anti-Semitism.
And it was held at?
It was held at Yale University. And
huge success.
It was a great success. Over 500 people attend. There was 108 papers or presentations, and the who's who in the field from around the world were there.
And is it not fair to say that it reflected well on Yale?
Well, this is the thing. I thought it would. I mean, we had a very large conference with high caliber scholars from all over the world. Many people attended. Scholars from all over the world were in attendance. And I think, in a sense, this created a problem for Yale and for some people at Yale. People in the administration told me directly that, in a sense, they were concerned that we shouldn't be critical of Islam, we have to engage Islam, sort of taking the Obama slogan to its extreme, if you will. And I think that
who said that to you?
This was a senior administration official at the university.
And where did they say this? Where did this person say this?
In their office.
So they called you in?
Yes, they called me in. And this was about a week before the conference. I had sent them the program, and they were disturbed by it. And they told me that we at YIISA have been too critical of Islam. And
they said this to you out loud?
Yes, directly to me, to my face. This is not second home.
Okay, this is important, Charles. This was verbalized to you by a senior member of Yale?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, right to my face in her office. And I said to her that none of YIISA's events, I take issues of racism and discrimination and Islamophobia and any kind of discrimination to any group of people extraordinarily serious. This is the work that my life has been dedicated to in many realms. And I told her that if you can see one paper or one lecture that YIISA has ever done in the past or will do in the future that diminishes Islam or denigrates Muslims in any way, I would apologize and I would not permit this to take place. But to engage Islam, to me, is wonderful, but when there's a reactionary social movement which is diametrically opposed to democratic principles, that subjugates women, advocates the killing of gay people, advocates the doing away with religious pluralism, doing away with basic notions of citizenship, and, to boot, uses anti-Semitism, and I'm choosing my words carefully, genocidal anti-Semitism, as an important part of their political culture and popular culture and worldview and theology, then I think it's the role of scholars to study this. And I think reactionary social movements of this kind, be they anywhere in the world, from any realm of the population or any group of people, ought to be A, studied and understood, and B, I think we have to find strategies to diffuse it and to protect the people that these people are intent on marginalizing and in some cases exterminating.
Now, you know I am wholly sympathetic with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And my questions now have to do with the process Yale used, in essence, against YIISA. Okay. Mm-hmm. So one question is, to what extent is the message you received from this woman official at Yale an isolated message, or were you getting this message and forms of criticism throughout? Because one of the things that I'm told by Yale is that there was constant feedback coming to YIISA, and that in some way you shouldn't have been surprised.
First of all, I think as a journalist you should ask Yale to substantiate this and to show you the reports or the emails or the letters that were apparently sent to me or my colleagues attesting to these facts that there was feedback. I don't think there'll be anything forthcoming, but I may be surprised. But I would ask you, perhaps they'll be forthcoming and sending you that information.
I will ask.
I don't believe it exists.
Okay.
So that's number one. I think first of all, I was surprised at the closing of the center. We had a faculty governance committee that comprised of about 13 scholars from different disciplines. And I would say about 2/3 of the group wanted us to have a 5-year renewal, to go through the renewal process completely unscathed and to continue doing our work. And there were a few professors that thought that we had to change more structurally. And
why?
To integrate YIISA more effectively into the university, into different departments, and to get more cross-fertilization going, and this would take time. I thought we did a decent job, but there was certainly room for improvement. So on the other end of the spectrum within the Faculty Governance Committee, there were a few people saying that we should get about 2 years probation to fix what they thought were structural limitations. Mm-hmm. And the group kind of debated this. But within the group, who attended the meeting, everybody who attended the meetings wanted certainly YIISA to continue to, and they were shocked by the decision. And the Faculty Governance Committee, all of the Faculty Governance Committee actually went to meet the president and the provost after the report was, or the findings of the report was made public, to appeal their decision. And
what happened?
They were refused, but...
in what way were they refused?
They were told...
Were they listened to, first of all?
They met with the provost and the president. They were listened to, and they were told that, under no circumstances would YIISA be reactivated.
You were not part of that meeting?
I was not in attendance to that meeting.
Did you have any access yourself to appeal?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. And when... did people who did appeal report back to you what happened?
Sure, I have a lot of
friends. What
friends.
did they say happened?
That they were just unwilling to hear their appeal, and that they weren't going to do it. But this was about 3 weeks after the I guess the brouhaha in the media was going, and they informed people at the meeting that they would continue having a reading group, and they appointed a scholar, Maurice Samuels, to run a new program on anti-Semitism, and that they would continue it in some fashion, continue the study of anti-Semitism in some fashion. You mentioned that they're going to bring it to another level of academic is absurd.
Right.
There were 2 points. There was the spokespeople, the PR people at Yale, said that we had one article that was published from YIISA. That was a PR statement that apparently comes from the report that nobody's read. We know that at our center, we had graduate students, postdoc students, and senior research fellows who are with us at YIISA. They produced 8 working papers, over 49 articles, many of which were published in peer-reviewed journals. There were 8 books that were being published, including one by Bassam Tibi, who is an eminent scholar on Islam, and he wrote on radical Islam, jihad, and anti-Semitism. And David Menashri, who's a professor of Iranian studies at Tel Aviv University, he's writing a book on anti-Semitism in Iran. So that argument didn't hold water. And another argument that was put forward by the PR department was that they close centers on occasion. And they mentioned there was a center on racism at Yale that was
Correct.
Closed in 2007. So one of my young interns, who's an amazing young kid whose family actually comes from the former Soviet Union, from Russia, Uriel Epstein, he took 10 minutes and he did research on this center on anti-Semitism. He actually wrote a good article that was published. And he found that in 2000, the year 2000, the one academic professor connected to the center left Yale. And then in 2007, they decided to close the center. Between 2000 and 2007, there wasn't one meeting, one article published, or one seminar. It was dormant. Our center, on the other hand, in 5 years had over 120 seminars, 3 major international conferences, and hundreds of other events, from seminars, methodology courses. There was just no comparison. And we were poised, our budget was poised to grow substantially, about 3 times in size, and we were going to continue our work. So this argument that it's normal to do these things, or that we weren't at a certain level of academic standards, is just really, I would have to say publicly and sincerely, it's just a lie. It's not true.
What was your reaction when you saw criticism from within the Jewish community?
Right.
As opposed to the Alan Dershowitz who say, this is absolutely unacceptable, I've never seen anything like it, and it's a shanda. But there was some in the Jewish community who piled on. What was your response?
Right. So first of all, and I'm not trying to be humble, but this is a fact, there were many people who helped YIISA be what it was.
Yes.
Hundreds of scholars, students, philanthropists, volunteers. It was an amazing entity. So, it wasn't me, by all means, by any means. So the piling on. So I think in the Jewish Week there was a scholar who said that we were not academic enough, we were too much of an advocate. And I think it goes back to the fact that some people, and I think in the United States in particular, I think there's a fear in the community, and certainly in the academic community. There are Jewish people who are very uncomfortable, Jewish scholars who are very uncomfortable with this idea that anti-Semitism may be alive and well in our contemporary context and even in the United States. And I think people are quite ambivalent and even uncomfortable discussing contemporary issues. My background is in, as you said, in philosophy, social theory, but I did a lot of work on social policy, looking at how philosophy affects cultural policy from colonial times to multiculturalism. So my area is social policy, and YIISA was housed in an institution for social and policy studies. So a lot of my work and the work of some of my colleagues, not all, we were interdisciplinary, so there were quite a few historians looking at the Holocaust, looking at medieval anti-Semitism in the former Soviet Union, in Romania and Germany. We were quite diverse. But my work was looking at the social movement of radical Islam, the Iranian revolutionary regime, and how social policy can work to affect change in the region and to stop or to hinder or to expose this genocidal social movement. And some people thought that this was advocacy and not academic work. But I assure you, my colleagues and I, my work in particular is very much informed by the literature of people like Emmanuel Levinas looking at ethics, the work of Michael Walzer, Will Kimlicka, Charles Taylor looking at multiculturalism, how to recognize and integrate the other. And all of these great philosophers and thinkers write how if a group of people is dehumanized and delegitimized, if a social movement doesn't see a certain group as human or even a menace to humanity, what are the not only philosophical and ethical ramifications, but what are the political ramifications? So yes, I took a stand against radical Islam that is, in some of its forms, politically, its social policy, its theology, its military objectives, its philosophical objectives, is the removal of Jewish people from the Middle East. It is the subjugation of women. It is the elimination of people who are gay from the region. And as a scholar who believes in human rights, who I think it's the role of an intellectual to actually take a stand on these issues, an informed stand based on scholarship. So we were, yes, we were opposed to radical, genocidal anti-Semitism. But I can't imagine any of these people laying the same charges to a group, let's say, studying Center on Racism, or African American studies, or gay and lesbian studies, or gender studies. These accusations wouldn't be made against scholars doing, in many cases, very important work on these issues. But when the best scholars, and I'm saying literally in the world, we had the most eminent scholars from around the world in our center, to be dismissed as advocates, or as Professor Jeffrey Alexander wrote in the papers and said on NPR, that we were somehow representing the most right-wing, pernicious form of the Israeli government protecting the occupation policies of the Israeli regime, or the Zionist regime, or that YIISA would be as if the Black Panthers were running a center on racism at a university. That these irrational charges, to me, as a scholar, when people, intelligent people, start behaving irrationally and they can't even engage, I mean, these are sociologists who we're speaking about, when they can't even engage in sociological analysis, but they are, I would say, dehumanizing and objectifying not only me and my colleagues, but an entire project to study anti-Semitism, that something is not rational, something is not right. And I think it points to the fact that in this country, I would say that some intellectuals in particular, in the chatting classes, are quite uncomfortable with the way Israel is being portrayed. I don't think that's the reality, that's a whole other discussion, but the way Israel is being portrayed, to me it's reminiscent of how some Jewish people, and even some Jewish leaders in the United States during the 1930s and 40s tried to distance themselves from European Jews, particularly shtetl Jews, Yiddish-speaking, primitive, in quotation, Jews, because they were afraid if refugees came to the United States that the balance, the demographic balance in the country would be offset, and it would cause anti-Semitism in this country. And I think that people are just trying to distance themselves from Israel and from this whole sort of mess in the Middle East. And I find that to be cowardice at the highest level.
In some way, you're suggesting that Yale said you were not politically correct. Is there any extent to which anti-Semitism is at work here within the Yale system?
It's a good question. So I can't say that, I won't say for Yale. There were people at Yale in positions of power that certainly found what we were doing problematic and wanted to silence us. I would say one other part of this equation is that the Iranian revolutionary regime, roughly 2 years ago, sent out a list of 60 institutions around the world that were deemed hostile to the revolution. So the BBC, Stanford University, Yale University was put on this list. And some people told me directly at Yale that they blamed me and YIISA for having Yale on this list. I thought it would be a badge of honor that a genocidal regime would be, that we would help to put Yale on this list. But I was told, again, by a high-ranking official at the university directly to my face, that the Yale Corporation, and that was the first time I heard the term the Yale Corporation, didn't look kindly at this because they drew the line when one member of the Yale community was interfering with the work of others. And there were people at Yale doing research in Iran on issues of drug abuse and politics and all sorts of things. And the fact that Yale was on this list hindered their work. And this is where the Yale Corporation drew the line. And I don't think it's a surprise that last September, Hillary Mann Leverett and Flint Leverett, who essentially are very closely aligned with the Iranian revolutionary regime, came to Yale University as special research fellows. And they invited President Ahmadinejad to a Yale event, a Yale seminar. And this went off, this wasn't controversial, but somehow YIISA for some people was controversial. So I find that just staggering, morally, ethically, politically, and even in terms of scholarship and academic freedom. That was also a piece of the situation in a way.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the answer, though, to my question.
Okay.
Is anti-Semitism at work at Yale?
So I would say yes, and I'll say, and I think we have to be clear. I think anti-Semitism has and I'm speaking very broadly, but it had several phases. When the world, or certainly Europe, saw the reality through the lens of religion, the Jews were the wrong religion. When Europe and other parts of the world started to see reality through the lens of biology, of ethnicity, of race and nation, the Jews were the wrong nation, and they were the race that was poisoning the pure white race. And now I think the new anti-Semitism is very much connected to and linked to the demonization and the delegitimization of Israel. And I think, so I would say yes, in the sense that Jews or Jewish projects that fit into this sort of liberal, postmodern view of the world are very much accepted. Yale has many Jewish scholars and Jewish students, and there's a vibrant Jewish community and a Jewish life at Yale, which exists and I'm sure will continue to exist, and I don't think it's threatened at this point. So at that level, there is no anti-Semitism. But if contemporary anti-Semitism deals with the delegitimization and demonization of Israel, and anybody or any institution that becomes somehow connected to it, then yes. And I think Ron Rosenbaum spoke about in his article in Slate magazine, writing about YIISA, that there's a new quota, and there's a new Jewish quota, and Jews who don't fit into this sort of, whatever this liberal worldview is, which I can't imagine really what it is, that if people taking a stand against anti-Semitism in the Middle East, or even trying to understand it, that somehow they're linked to this problematic entity called Israel, or the Zionist project. And it's beyond the pale in some milieu, in some circles in the university system in the United States. And I think that if the demonization of Israel has a connection to anti-Semitism, then yes, I think there's what happened to YIISA is, I can't say it's all about anti-Semitism, but there's a big piece of it that is. Mm-hmm. And we have to realize that there's young scholars in the universities throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe who are young, brilliant intellectuals, and the minute they look at these issues of looking at how anti-Semitism figures in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the Israeli-Arab conflict or in Middle Eastern societies, they are deemed as being supporters of an entity which is beyond the pale of rational discourse. These are people who purport to, that Zionism or Israeli policies are apartheid-like. If, from a liberal human rights perspective, that if Israel's an apartheid state, then from a liberal human rights perspective, we have to dismantle it. We're morally obligated to dismantle it. And that's what's at stake, I think, today in the academy. And it's very problematic. And I think the mood in the United States on campuses is problematic at that level. And we're also at a point where liberals, and I always thought liberals were very much in favor of human rights, of integrating, making strong citizenship, integrating others into society. So now you have liberals who are saying it's progressive to engage the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is a movement. Kawadari speaks regularly and on a regular basis about annihilating the state of Israel, about killing Jews, publicly saying that he hopes that, Allah willing, that he'll be able to finish the work of Hitler. And where is the line in the United States of America to say, you know what, there is anti-Semitism in the world and we won't tolerate it?
Mm-hmm. We've had many people discuss how on college campuses, young Jews who do support Israel are intimidated by those who would claim, as you've just described, that Israel is somehow an apartheid, villainous state, and that they are intimidated to the point of being silent. To what extent do you feel that you've encountered this among the Yale student body, and did Yale students ever protest YIISA?
There wasn't much protest against YIISA. There was a few people. There was one young man from California who has, I would say, connections to those who believe that Israel's an apartheid state, and he also has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, who wrote articles condemning us as being a racist institution. And soon after he wrote these articles, the PLO ambassador to the United States wrote a public letter to Yale University saying that YIISA was a racist institution that ought to be closed and removed from Yale. This is a representative that has international links and affiliations to other organizations that are relevant to American foreign policy, and it's not just an individual. When the ambassador of a PLO writes a letter. But yes.
But Yale students as such did not protest YIISA.
No.
And to what extent have you seen Yale students who tend to be pro-Israel intimidated at Yale?
I think in general Yale still is relatively open. It's not like Berkeley or Rutgers or Concordia, Montreal, but I would say there are students who are intimidated. There are some very, I would say, brave students who speak their mind and actually worked with us as interns at YIISA, who are brave, intelligent young people who I don't think they'll remain silent in the face of anything. So, but there is, I would say, a social pressure to remain silent.
When I spoke to Yale, I was told it's not that Yale is turning its back on the study of anti-Semitism, and that in fact Yale was going to begin the Yale program for the study of anti-Semitism with Maurice Samuels, a professor, a PhD from Harvard, as the head of it, and that they quoted Maurice Samuels as saying that this new Yale program for the study of anti-Semitism will not ignore either Arab or Islamic anti-Semitism. To what extent do you feel that this new program that Yale is initiating will in fact do an adequate job, and that in part, while you're sorry to lose YIISA's connection to Yale, Yale in fact is maintaining its commitment to the study of anti-Semitism?
If they do, I'd be very happy. I think there should be more research centers in the United States on issues of anti-Semitism with a focus on contemporary issues. So the more studies there are, I think the better it is. And Maurice Samuels is a good scholar and a decent person.
Do you know him?
I know him, and he's a good guy.
I looked at his bio.
Yeah.
There's very little Jewish studies there. He's basically a professor in the French department at Yale.
Right.
Why was Maurice Samuels chosen to head a Yale study on anti-Semitism if this was not his primary area of work or expertise?
Right. So that you'd have to ask Yale for. But he did, I know he's writing, or he recently completed a book on the image of Jews in 18th century French literature. So he has some workings on issues of anti-Semitism. So, but, you know, in a sense, I think scholars, Maury and other people at Yale are very intelligent people, and if they apply themselves to understand the contemporary context, I'm sure that they can do a good job.
If that's true, does it mitigate your criticism of Yale?
In what way? In what
Well, on the one hand, I asked you bluntly, do you think anti-Semitism was at work here? And you said, in part, it is. I mean, that was a dramatic statement for Charles Small to make. Then I say to you, but they're going to begin another program to study anti-Semitism. They've picked a gentleman who you now quote as having done work, albeit in French literature, but it is about the image of the Jew in 18th century French literature. And, you know, maybe, I mean, what Yale said to me is the proof will be in the pudding. It's basically what you've just said. So, although we're sorry to see your work at Yale end, maybe Yale deserves less criticism than it's received in the general Jewish community for closing down the study of anti-Semitism, when in fact it's not closing it down. It's shifting. What it argues is to a different kind of academic level of commitment.
Right. So two things. I would say my reading of the situation was after weeks of publicity, a very bad publicity that was harming Yale, they decided to create the center. I don't think that was in the works And I think that was a response to the criticism. And I think that, so the criticism played an important role. And if this new program does well, I'll be very happy. And as you say, the proof is in the pudding. And there are people there who can do a good job if they're given the space and resources to do it. So that's a good thing. And I hope there'll be more centers in the United States dealing with this issue in the future.
Might you resurrect YIISA at some other academic institution?
I'm sure that I'll continue working on these issues, on this area. This is a very important topic, unfortunately. The times globally are very serious, and we need people to really try to help understand and shed light into this situation. So yes, I'll continue working. I'm speaking to various universities. There's also the possibility that we'll open an independent research center, perhaps in New York, connected to a university. So yes, we're not sure exactly what we're doing, but we will continue doing this work.
Yeah, I have no right to say this to you, but I will say it anyway. You can't stop. Your work has been too unique, outstanding, and it has made a contribution both to the general study of anti-Semitism and to the Jewish world that cannot stop. I don't know where now this is going to lead you. Again, I've told our audience, you and I have a relationship be off camera as well. I don't know whether you're going to ultimately center your life in America, whether you go back to Canada, whether you go to Israel. You have many, many options, and I am sure many, many people would be thrilled to, in some way, embrace you both professionally and personally. So I know that ultimately you personally are going to do very, very well. But I really believe the work you did was just outstanding. I was thrilled that you were comfortable that Shalom TV would constantly come up to tape what I thought was lectures you could see nowhere else, and you benefited the the large audience that were able to participate in YIISA through television. So it is my hope that whatever you decide to do professionally, that it will, I know it's going to include in some way this work that you've devoted your life to. You have been an extraordinary human being, an extraordinary individual who's contributed to Jewish life, and you will always have a home here with me on Shalom TV, and I will continue to turn to you, not only to talk about anti-Semitism, but all issues confronting contemporary life as it affects the Jewish world. I thank you very much, Charles.
Thanks. It was really an honor to be here with you again.
Thank you very, very much. That was my conversation with Charles Small. As you well know, he was the founding director of YIISA, the Yale Initiative for the Interdisciplinary Study of Anti-Semitism. He ran it before it was at Yale, then for 5 years at Yale. Yale decided to end its affiliation with YIISA, and we'll see now where Charles will resurrect the work he was doing, because it was important work, and I know that you appreciate it as well. And as you listen to him, you're really hearing, I said before, he's one of the really good guys, and I hope now you know why. There are a few people on the American Jewish or world Jewish scene who have more courage than Charles. He has done extraordinary work in a field that is, in some instances, terribly, terribly backbiting and sniping, and people just love to undercut other people, and he has stood above it all, and so I wish him all the best. I'm sure you do too. If you want to be in touch with Charles, you can always do so by sending an email to me, and as always, I want to hear any of your reactions to the things that Charles has said here on Shalom TV. So please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. and we thank you for your kind support.